Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Bava daf Nun Vav. We are going to begin on the very bottom of Nun Hamid Beis, the second line from the bottom by the two dots. So we ended off with a statement that there's four things in which a person is going to be pater midi adam b'chai midi shemayim. The first of them, in which we just listed them in conclusion of yesterday's daf, and now we're going to explain. Omer Mar, the first one was haporitz gader bifnei behemas chaveroi. A person breaches a fence in front of his friend, and his friend had animals there, which presumably what happened afterwards is the animals ended up escaping from this breach, and something happened which caused damage and problems. So if we're dealing with a totally strong wall, then bidi adam nami nechayev, says Rashi. Mia kaisel daha biadayim avad. You did this with your own hands by breaching this perfectly good wall. So at least you should be chayev, says Rashi, for the wall, the damage of the wall. Ella, as we continue to Nun Vav Amud Aleph, we're talking about b'kaisel ra'uha. We're talking that the wall already had problems, and therefore, do afsadei do mistar koi. The wall needed to be removed anyway. So the fact that you put a breach into this weak wall, so you're not going to be chayav for the damages of breaking someone else's wall. Omer Mar, ha kaifev kamaso shechaver b'fnei hadaleka. We have the second one of this list of four, which said that if a person bends the grain of his friend in front of a fire, which caused a fire. That he bent it in a normal wind, says Rashi. He caused this fire to happen and for this to be burned in a natural cause. So therefore, so it only needed the fire due to an uncommon wind which he didn't expect. And that's the reason why he's part of Rav Ashi Oimer Tamoin Itmar Mishum Deshami Tamon Be'esh. Actually, it was covered grain, and we have the din of Tamoin when it comes to fire, says Rashi. Chikisa Kamas Chavero Besedinin. That these standing grains were actually covered with a cloth. Because Shiroi Deleka Etzla. And when there was a fire coming, as again we say that anything which is tamoin, that is damaged by fire, the din is that you're put, as we saw elsewhere. Okay, so let's look at question 5. So either because it was Rosh Hashanah Matsuya, or because never dolot salcha daite, or we're talking about the shavi tamon de grumim and zikinhu. Okay, they threw in the words because of grum and zikin, but again, when it comes to din of tamoin, you're pater by ish. The third case, Omer Mar hasaycher edi sheker, a person who hires false witnesses. So this is the third case in which you're going to be pater bidi adam. So hechidami ilema lenafshe, is it that you did this for yourself, so that you can cause a monetary loss for others? So if that's the case, the money that you cause someone to lose, you should have to return. Ella lechavre. It says that you hired false witnesses for someone else. Says Rashi, Sachar Edi Sheker, you hired false witnesses, so you're not the one that is really part of the case at all. Reuven loses the money, Shimon gets the money, and you're Levi, but therefore, since you don't really have any direct connection to the money, so therefore you're not Chai B'di Adam, you're still Chai B'di Shemayim. Okay. And the fourth one is someone who knows Adis of his friend and he doesn't testify. So b'ma'askinan ilema bebetray. that there's actually two people involved. So pshita deraisahu imo yagav nasavaino. The pasuk says clearly that you're going to be chai b'di shemayim, because since you knew testimony and you didn't say it, so therefore, because of the pasuk says v'nasavona, you're going to bear the sin. Namely, there's going to be a punishment b'di shemayim. El b'chad. No, the chiddush is that it's with one person, and therefore, even though that's the case, that you're not going to have to extract money if you would testify, but at least it would be enough to be mechayim the other person a shvuah, and therefore, for that reason, you're chayim b'di shemayim. Says Rashi, imo yagi b'treika mishdoi midikopid agada. Since it talks about this language of yagid, mashma she'ena magidin mischayim zemamoin. The oid kaimelon kol makom shnemer aid. Anytime it says the word aid, which we saw in the beginning of Masechta Sota, harikan shnei aidim. It really means two. Ashipono chachakasav echad, until it's explicit. Kediksivo yokum aid echad beish. If it says echad next to the word aid, to the fact that it says aid echad, then it's obviously one witness. If it just says aid, it's referring to two. And therefore, when the pasuk says imo yagid, and it's referring to two witnesses. However, with one, you're chayav b'di shemayim, because you could have had this person make a shvuah. And the Rashi says v'dilma loy havi mishtaba b'shikra mishalom, because you know the truth. So this person may end up saying, you know what, now that I'm chayav shvuah, I'm not going to make a shvuah sheker, so therefore I'm going to end up giving the money, whatever it is. So therefore, you had the ability to be able to have a positive outcome in this verdict, but by the fact that you said nothing and you didn't testify, even though you're only one person, you're chai b'di shemayim. Basuleika, you tell me these are only the four cases, you're chai b'di shemayim? Va'ika, but there are many others. Simon ha'isa b'sam v'shlech haver nishbar. Ha'isa malacha b'mei chatos. Ufaras chatos patim b'nei adam chai b'di shemayim. A person does work, says Rashi, sheshakol kenegdan mashkoles, you use it as a weight, as is brought down in Masechtas Gittin, vehin nifson b'malacha. We know these things you're not allowed to do malacha with, so therefore, if you end up using them, you're going to be pater b'di shemayim, because it's a hezek she'enu nikr l'shmei hezek, as we said over there. But nonetheless, you're still going to be chai b'di shemayim, because you did cause this loss, even though it's a hezek she'enu nikr. So that's question number one. So there are other cases. If a person puts some type of poison by an animal of your friend, again, this is considered, you're going to be pater b'di adam, because it's, as we said, it's a grumble and a zikin. However, you're still chai b'di shemayim. Which we had recently, that when a person would send a fire in the hands of someone who's not a bardas, so such an individual, you shouldn't have done so. But even though, again, they may have caused damages, but again, you're not going to be chayiv because it wasn't you that did it, but nonetheless, you're going to be chayiv, you're chayiv b'di shemayim. Here's another question. Va'ika, hamavis chaveroi pater b'di adam chayiv b'di shemayim. If you scare your friend, Rashi says, taka lo ba'oznoi pitoim, uvi'atoi doi avidli masa b'gufo, that you actually screamed directly into his ear and it caused him to be afraid, and because of that it caused some type of damage to this person. So you're chayiv only b'di shemayim. But again, that's another example. Ve'ika nishbar kadaber shasarab, a person broke a kad in the public, v'loi silka, but he didn't pick up the shards, nafal gam loi, and a person's camel fell, or a case of a camel fell, v'hamida, and you didn't pick up the animal. So even though Rameir says that you're chayiv, this is actually, Rashi says, a machlokas in Perek HaMeniach HaZakan, which is on Daf Chav Tes, whether the din of beniskel poisheya, 2 points when a person falls, is it niskel, the person who fell, is a poisheya, not a poisheya, and also b'mafkin nezachav, had to do with regarding making your possessions orderless. So in that situation, are you chayiv or pater? But nonetheless, at least according to the Chachamim, we see this is another situation. So the questions are, we don't find that there's only 4 situations where a person is going to be pater b'di adam, chayiv b'di shemayim. We find numerous other situations throughout Shas. So your answer is in. You're right. There are many other cases. So why aren't they listed? We definitely only want to mention these which are more important to be mentioned. Why? Because you would think, for whatever reason, we're going to go through these, that maybe you're going to be not even chai b'dishamayim. These other cases, because there is an element of guilt, things that you have done which are wrong, so because of that, you're certainly going to be chai b'dishamayim. That's no chiddush. However, these four cases, the reason why they're specifically mentioned is because a person would maybe think that Taki would not be chai b'dishamayim either. So why? First of all, so again, you had this wall that was weak, it was going to fall down anyway, and you just knocked it down. You had to be knocked down soon anyway. So he didn't really do anything. Again, almost you could say maybe you should pay me for having provided some of the service of beginning the process of knocking down your wall, which needed to be knocked down in a few minutes anyway. So the din is, no, it doesn't make any difference. You're still chayiv b'dishmayim. The second chiddush is a kafik kamasel shalchavedai nami. If you have it bent down, which again, as we said, either we're talking about a case of it's ruach sheina matsuya or it's tamoin, which we're potter by tamoin be'esh madatema lema mi havi yadana dias haruach sheina matsuya. In other words, if we want to say the first shot that we're talking about ruach matsuya, we're saying it's ruach sheina matsuya, which is uncommon. So it's uncommon. No one's expecting something which is uncommon. It's a davar which is lo shchiach. So something which is not shchiach. Maybe you would think b'dishamayim namu l'chaim kamashmon. You would think maybe you shouldn't be chayiv at all, even b'dishamayim. And Rav Ashi di'amei nami tamoy nit mar mahadatema ana kisuye kisite nihalach. I covered your grain, right? So he can say, I'm the one who covered your grain. Because there's this din that you're potter by tamoin, the din should be your potter b'dishmayim as well. The sheker nami, the third case, when a person hires false witnesses in order to testify. So, and we said it's not talking about where it's to extract money for your own benefit. You're doing it for someone else. So the din is your chayiv at least b'dishamayim because of the following principle, as we find many times in Shas, including Masechtas Kedushin. We know there's a general principle in Shliach Davar Aveira that if I tell you to do an Aveira and you do it, so I'm not responsible, because in the event that you have a Rav, which is Hashem and his mitzvos, and me, the Talmud, the person who instructs you to do a sin, Dibur Mishaymin. Obviously, don't listen to me. You're supposed to listen to the teacher. You're supposed to listen to Hashem. And therefore, the fact that you did the Aveira, you're the one who's responsible. So you can perhaps say that when it comes to this situation, why should I be chayiv at all? Now, going back to the other case about Talmud, the whole notion of I covered your grain, that you maybe think you're potter b'dishmayim, is basically you're saying I tried to protect your grain by covering it up so it won't get ruined. So he's actually maybe saying, I did a big favor over here by having it covered. So therefore, you would think certainly shouldn't be chayiv b'dishmayim. Okay. So what is the whole notion? We said there's only one person that decides I'm withholding testimony. Who says that when one witness, me, and Eid Echad comes, I'm going to cause him to be chayav a shvua, and he's going to, because he's such a big tzaddik over here, that he's going to end up saying, oh, you know what, I probably shouldn't be lying, and I'm not going to say shvua sheker, and then he'll admit to it, and then you save the day. Dilma havi mishtaba l'shikra. He may end up lying anyway. All right, he's not lying now, so the fact that we're going to hold a shvu on him, maybe he'll lie then also. So basically, the Gemara over here is telling us again, there indeed are many other situations where a person can be chayiv, numerous situations, b'di shemayim, but nonetheless, we don't mention all of them. TA 14 didn't do it yet. Okay, all right. Or TB 15. Let's see. Yeah. Similar to question 5 over here, which we'll just read what the question is now. It says, "Ha'koif of kamasa shechaver b'fnei hadaleka yim chayiv." So if it's a ruach matsuya, then you would be chayiv. Ruach she'ena matsuya, you're patur b'nei adam v'chayiv b'nei shemayim. Okay, pretty straightforward. All right, let's now continue by the next piece. 2 dots. Omer Rabba. So Rabba says the following: V'hu she'chasra. That's only if the animal dug out. What is this going on? So actually, let's see the Mishnah. So the Mishnah said that let's say you have a case where I'm just trying to find it over here on the top of Nifritza B'Laila. Okay, so you have this wall, and everything, the animal was totally protected, and it was a good wall. And then Nifritza B'Laila, the wall fell down in the middle of the night. We saw Taisus, maybe you don't have to repair it if you knew about it. Osher Pratzul Listim, or let's say bandits broke it. The Yotz and the animal came out, the Hizika Potter. In that situation, you're going to be Potter in those cases. So on this, the Gemara continues with Omer Rabba. V'hu shechasra. That's only if the animal dug out. Of a lo chasra, mashmo what? If the animal didn't dig himself out, what are you going to tell me? Then in that situation, chayiv, look at Rashi. Haditna nifritzable laila Potter. If, let's say, again, there was a breach at night, kagun shechasra habehema. It's because the animal was digging. Ve'pila hakaisel da'anasu. Because it was digging around the fence, it caused the fence to weaken and fall, and therefore it's an oinus. Which is mashma, if the wall, as Rashi says, did not fall because the animal was digging around it, but rather elwa ma'atzmanaf, or the wall just happened to fall by itself, in that situation you're going to be chayiv. Is that true? So hechidami ilaim b'kaisel bari. If we're talking about a strong wall, kilo chasra my chayiv, mahavi le'amevid. It's a total oinus. If let's say the animal was digging, and the reality is, okay, fine. So in that situation, you're going to be chayiv if the wall just falls. But if it's a strong wall, and for some reason the contractor did everything perfectly, and the wall has been there for a long time, there's no reason to anticipate it's going to fall in the middle of the night or to fall whatever. So therefore, because of that, you'll chayish min oinus. You shouldn't be chayiv. Elwa b'koisel ruah. We're talking about a weak wall, so a wall which is bound to fall anyway. So then, why do we make this distinction? Ki chasra my potter. Why, if he's digging, do we say that you're potter? Now, even though we're going to see in a second some machlokas, but originally there's there's a pshia because the wall is destined to fall anyway. But the reason why it fell at the end was an oinus because the animal was digging around it. So So I can understand if, again, we're dealing with a situation of when the animal's digging, the reason why you're potter is because even though it's techilaso b'pshia v'sayv v'aynis, you hold potter, but it's actually machlokes. According to another shittul, you should. Why would you say you're potter in that case? Ella, we have to establish the Mishnah somewhere else, so we don't say it's totally on this machlokas. Masnisim v'kosul bari. Taka, we're talking about a strong wall. So 1 second. If we're dealing with a strong wall, so even if the animal isn't digging, l'chayr, we should still be potter. And even, the truth is, even if it was not digging, the din still would be that you would be potter. So what are we talking about? Why are we making a distinction about digging or not digging? What is Rabbi talking about? It's not talking about the ratio, because it doesn't make any difference. Because if we're talking about a strong wall, certainly if the wall just fell, you're potter. But even if in the event, if the wall just fell, you're going to be potter. If the dog digged and then the wall fell, then you be potter. So then what was this distinction of Rabba? The Chitmar Rabba, Seifa Hitmar, and the Seifa. What is the Seifa? Hanicha b'chama. Let's say you had the animal in the heat, which can cause the animal to go stir crazy. You gave this over to people who are incompetent or not someone who can be trusted to watch these things. You went out and the hizika did damage chayim. And on this, Rabbi says, "V'afilu chasra," and even with a strong wall, you're still going to be chayiv, even if it dug. There's no question if the animal didn't dig and the wall fell in that situation. The whole thing is pshia. Because, again, if we're dealing with the wall itself falling, so the reality is, even if maybe it's a strong wall, it doesn't make any difference, because the reality is you're putting it in the hands of someone who's a cher shadav katan, or you're in a situation where the animal is b'chama, which is going to do everything in its power to try to get out of that situation and even do something which is not in the norm. Even if the animal is digging, you're still going to be chayiv. Ma'adatayim, even though you can say, well, it's techilas b'mshiva sayf ba'aynis. Ma'adatayim ahavi le techilas b'mshiva sayf ba'aynis kamash one the klub shehi. This is all pshia. Why? The animal is digging. Because my timer, Yermele medi yadat. You know, kivan dishavtka b'chama. Once you leave an animal out in the heat, kol tastika the isla lamevid abda v'nafka. Says Rashi, tachbulois. Every option, every tactic this animal is going to use to get out of this situation, because it is burning up, it's boiling, it's dehydrating. So it's going to go completely mad and crazy to get out of being in that situation. And therefore, even if it's digging, which you would say that's Seifa B'Ainis, no, that's not Seifa B'Ainis. That's Pshia also, because it's self-understood that that's what the animal is going to do. And therefore, that's what he's coming to tell us. The chiddush is that if you would leave an animal in this situation, it's a loma boy. It's all situations you're going to be chayiv. If it didn't dig, and even if it did dig, we don't say t'chilas b'pshia v'sayv b'aynis. The whole thing is pshia. Then the Mishnah said, "Hoitzia listim chayavim." So, as we can understand, if the listim took the animal out, in this situation, they were koine b'shinui makoim and maybe yish balim. So, because of this, now they have some element of kinyan. Because they have a kinyan on this animal, the din is that the listim are going to be chayav if it damages. So on this, the Gemara continues and says as follows. As we continue to Nun Vav Amud Beis, L'chara, it's pshita. After all, kivan diafkuha, since they took the animal out, so kaimula b'rishusai hulachol mili. It's in their rishus for all matters, says Rashi. Ika mashicha v'shini rishus dahavi kanui l'chol mili. There's a mashicha and there's a shini rishus, so it's a kinyan. So l'chayra, it's a davar pashit. Okay, so lotzricha dekamula ba'apa. What does that mean? Says Rashi, shalom mashchuha. They didn't actually pull the animal, which would be a kinyan, and then certainly they would have obligations over it. El amdu bifanea, they stood in front of it, l'chol tzad, on all sides, shalotelech anavana, so it couldn't go the right or the left. Elo l'kama le'achoil, only to go in front to eat. Now, it didn't touch the animal, but it had a whole bunch of listim that created like a human wall around it to force the animal to go. So therefore, that in itself is also enough that they're going to be kind to this animal, even though they didn't actually do mashiach on it. Ki hadiyam marab oim marab masna marab hamaymid behemas chavera al kamas chavera chayiv. The person who puts the behema of his friend on the grain on his other friend, he's going to be chayiv if that animal eats it. Maimid, so what do you mean? Pshita. Of course, he was kainit because he actually moved the animal to that area. Again, as we said before, that he blocked its other paths. So that's what happened. So therefore, because he did that, even though you didn't physically move it, you basically didn't give it any other options but to be able to go in that direction. Therefore, you're going to be chayiv in that situation as well. So Abaye says, Rabbi Yosef, Hekisha Amritlan Velistim Nami Dehikishua. We're talking about where they hit the animal, says Rashi, b'makel, with a stick. B'ahi dehamayimid mishum hachi mechayev. And by hitting it, that's how he's chayev. Says Rashi, Vashim in masnisin dehikisha b'makel zuhi mashicha. even though you didn't actually take it with your hands and pull it, but by you hitting the animal, directing it in that way is akin to Mashicha, and therefore for that reason the listim are going to now be chayiv, even though they didn't actually do a kinyan as we would normally see it, but nonetheless that also constitutes a kinyan. Question 6. So either, as we said, we're talking about the kamula ba'apa, or they hit it b'makel with a stick, that this actually halachically will constitute as mashicha, and therefore now they are koinit. TA14. Amaymid behemas chavero al kamas chavero chayiv. Gemara parach pshita dechayiv. Shani lo sricha ma de kimta b'teretz b'havimina maskana. So b'havimina de kamla ba'apa u'maskana b'hakish b'makel. Okay, not sure why it's a havimina and a maskana. Akishin armatlan v'listim nami b'hikush. Okay, so I'm not really sure why we have to say it's a havamina maskana. It almost sounds like a second teretz. Okay, but that's how Dirshu wants us to read it, that it's taka a havamina and a maskana. Okay, all right, something to think about. So look at this Taisus maybe. Hakisha Amidlan Utchilo Hayasaiver the Maimed Behema Hainu Shamaksik Biyadai Ha'asbar Malicha Mamishal Akama Mamida Shamahaki Havimshita Tvei. Okay. Alright. And the next Taisus over here as well. Okay. So again there's Uchaira, it's read as just as a Havamina and then a Maskana. Okay. But so then the Mishnah says so let's say the animal is given over to a shepherd. So then the din is that if that's what happens, that the animal is given over to the shepherd, and nichnas haroya tachtov. So then the shepherd takes upon this responsibility. So Amri tachtov the man. What does that mean? Who is the roa instead of? Does it mean that they are under the, instead of the owner of the animal? We already learned that before. We know that if you give over to the Arba Shomrim something to watch, so now they assume that responsibility. So we're not saying that that's not true, but that wouldn't be what our mission is trying to teach us. El takta of the shomer. It's referring to the din that the shomer, the shepherd, is going to take over the place of the other shomer. In other words, there was originally one shomer, even though he had accepted responsibilities. Nonetheless, a shomer who gives over to a roya, to a second shomer, so now the second shomer takes the responsibilities, and the first one is mistalik himself from the responsibilities. Which the Gemara discusses this in Bamatzia, we may touch upon it here a little bit, whether the din of Shomer Shemasal Shomer. So the Shomer Kama, if they're Gamri, are you telling me that the first Shomer now is completely free? Again, as a machlokis over there, what's the din of Shomer Shemasal Shomer? Does the first Shomer completely relinquish all of his rights? Or could the Baal HaBehema say, 1 second, I chose Shomer number 1. Shomer number 2 shouldn't be accepting this role. I don't trust Shomer number 2. I trust Shomer number 1. So Amalek Rava, Rava would answer you, because otherwise it's a problem. How do we understand this? My Masru L'Raya Barzile. It means that the shepherd gives it over to his student. He gave it over to his servant. It's understood that that's something in which may happen. And therefore, if you give over something to a shomer, even according to him, in which Rashi says, you're going to be, the first shomer will be chayiv. Generally, mafsid at, mafkid at mehimnili b'shvua. Ilo mehimnili b'shvua. I trust you, I don't trust him. But when it comes to you giving over to shomer number 1, and shomer number one gives it over to his student, to his apprentice, it's self-understood that when you give something over to a teacher, they have full rights also to have their students to also take responsibility, and therefore you don't have a taina against that. Since it says the language is given over to a shepherd, why does it say given over to someone else? Why dafkan does it say the word shepherd? Shema mina, my masra roya lebarzile. It must be referring to, again, that's given over to his student. It's normal that that's what happens. But for him to give it over to some regular shomer number two, not. So now we could flip it. So this actually now is a raya that the only reason why you're pater is because this first shomer is because he gave it over to a student. Just mashmi gave it to a second shomer, the first one would still be chayiv. So now it's a raya to Rava. So our reason that's not necessarily a proof either. The only reason why he mentions this is not because it's saying this dafka and coming to exclude an acher. No, the truth is even a shemer could be pater. So why does it mention this case? Because that's the normal circumstance. Normally, the second shomer is not going to be some acher. It's going to be someone who has a connection to the first shomer, namely his student. Okay, we'll stop here. And let's see, maybe there's a question here. Adkan.